time frame. I know we need to begin and end by 1 o'clock to keep you on time. So let me begin first with a thank you. My name is Michelle Oldroyd, and I am a member of the State Bar Civic Education Committee. That committee began as a vision of Rod Snow as part of his presidency with the Utah State Bar, and it basically began as a program for high school students. And what really has come to be now is an opportunity for teachers statewide, classrooms statewide, parents and educators to come together and to see bar members in classrooms ranging from elementary through senior high school, K through 12 classrooms throughout our state, filled with lawyers and judges for the coming school year. And I can't tell you how much that pleases me. I think that lawyers are especially equipped to be with our students and talk to them about the skills that are necessary to be successful in whatever professional endeavor they choose. But specifically, I think that lawyers are very equipped to teach our students about primary skills that we use every single day that they might not appreciate coming out of all of their classrooms, whether it be critical thinking skills coming out of math, learning to appreciate complementary angles and colors in art, differences of opinion, so to speak, the way we perceive art and use art in our culture, even to the primary values of reading and writing in our language arts classrooms. Specifically, these lessons are intended to enhance our social studies core curriculum throughout the state. And so we're going to be focusing on social studies and civics classrooms that we're visiting. But by all means, if you have other ideas about how we can contribute to our local schools or schools that you're contributing to, and you want to make the committee aware so that we can begin to track some of this information and continue to interact with our schools in a more effective way in terms of our community outreach, we'd be happy to hear from you about that. I want to invite one member of our committee to come forward just briefly and address you this afternoon. This is Robert Austin, a good colleague of mine, not a bar member, but a member of the State Office of Education, and he sits on our committee both to help us with our understanding of the core curriculum as well as to enhance our interaction with the schools and our communication with our school districts and our teachers. And so I'm going to give Robert an opportunity to let you know what classrooms we're going to be visiting and a little bit about the kind of enthusiasm he's already encountered for this program.
Thank you. I really just wanted to be here to thank you. I think that one of the critical messages of this program is the idea that we are all a part of public education, we're all a part of our community, and we have to think about the kinds of ways that we can make as porous a wall as possible between the larger community and our public schools. Our Utah students need to see the possibilities for their lives. We need to prepare them to be college and career ready. We have a new Utah Core expectations that really emphasize the importance and power of argument and crafting an argument. And so there's no better purveyor of the possibilities of higher education and the possibilities of argument than attorneys. So I want to thank you for your willingness to walk into 7th grade classrooms where I taught for years, and how much courage it can take to enter those walls and work with those students. Although I think kindergartners are probably a tougher crowd, so luckily you're going to be saved from going to kindergarten. But the critical skill is one of helping students understand their obligation in this amazing experiment that we call America, and the importance of the rule of law and the importance of the independent judiciary, the importance of the fundamental principles that are at the heart of what makes this nation such a fascinating and wildly successful experiment. So I thank you for that. I thank you for your willingness to give of your time and your expertise, your willingness to work with people both on this giant kickoff day of September 17th as a big teach-in, but also throughout the year, and I hope for years to come, in terms of partnering with and thinking about the kinds of ways we can continue to encourage civic education among Utah students. So there are schedules laid out. Hundreds of teachers have responded, literally, to this opportunity. and are opening their doors and welcoming you in either on the 17th or on other days. And there's a system in place, if you haven't yet looked at it, for you to say when you're free and how to connect with that teacher so you can then handle all of the logistics of when do I arrive and where do I sign in with the office and all of that. So the staff, Christy Abad and the staff, have worked diligently to make sure that this is as easy a process as possible. So I want to thank them publicly, and I definitely want to thank the rest of the members of the committee, but primarily I want to thank you. So I hope you have a fabulous time of it and enjoy your interactions with students. It's always an energizing experience. So have a great day, enjoy your lunch, and Michelle will go from here. Thank you.
And while we're just in our introductory phase, I want to acknowledge there are a couple of other members of our committee here. Kathy Dreyer is here on behalf of the Utah LRE Project, Law-Related Education Project of Utah. As well, Ben Hathaway is here, and he is a committee member and has been serving in a leadership capacity actually in our committee recently. And so I just want to acknowledge them and thank them for their service and their vision of this committee. How many of you have already visited the website and know which classrooms you're about to head into? Do any of you have head counts already in terms of how many students you will be interacting with? If you know how many students approximately, there are pocket constitutions already outside this doorway when we walk out, and you're welcome to retrieve those if you want to take pocket constitutions to leave with your students when you finish your lesson plan. You can leave that as a takeaway for the classroom, and they're already outside for you. If you don't yet know how many students you're going to be interacting with and you want to come back and get them, they'll be available through the bar offices. Christy Abad will ensure that there are some at the front desk for you if you need it before, just to make a quick visit here on your way to a school. I would suggest taking them with you. You may not necessarily use them as part of your lesson, depending on how you choose to orient yourself to the lesson plan, but they're certainly a good takeaway for the teachers. And what we've just tried to do is leave a lesson plan that also has some follow-up opportunity for the teachers, such that this is not just a one-time visit by a guest speaker and then they suddenly leave the topic of the independent judiciary by the wayside and continue back to their regular curriculum, but that this can sort of integrate its way into what the teachers already have planned for their elementary, junior, and senior high school students by way of civics lessons. And then just by way of understanding how to gear my comments as well, how many of you have signed up to be in elementary school classrooms? And how many of you have signed up to be in junior high school classrooms? And then senior high school classrooms? Okay, so we have a pretty decent mix, and I actually think that that's rather exciting. When we originally oriented ourselves to the question of how to put lawyers and judges into our classrooms, we thought in our first few meetings that it really wouldn't be a productive conversation with a really young audience. And what we've realized in having this conversation is that all of our community really benefits from a better understanding of the judiciary, particularly in an election year. Those senior high school students, those who are turning 18, are going to be kind of jazzed up, I think, about their civic responsibility and tuned into, hopefully, getting registered to vote if they have not yet done so, but really participating in our democracy this fall and seeing it at work. But some of them may be a little bit confused as to how they interact with the judiciary, seeing as though hopefully they're not really involved in lawsuits or perhaps not visiting the court system yet. They might only know it as something they see on television or something that they hear about from a neighbor or a family member. And junior high school students and elementary students really won't have any kind of exposure to the process in the ways that we might assume. They might have seen courtrooms and classrooms online, for example. When I talk to my own kids who range from actually now a newborn to college, they actually really all have different experiences of the law. Some of them have only seen lawyers and judges on YouTube videos that they think are funny and that their friends think are funny, where someone's having a fist fight in a courtroom and suddenly it made its way around a few texts and somebody said, hey, check this out, and that's what they know of a courtroom or an argument. And some of them only know judges as Judge Judy and Judge Joe Brown and Judge Alex on TV, and we often have dinner table conversations having to dispel this myth that that's not quite what mom does. That's not quite what we see on a typical day. And in fact, we might not even see a courtroom on a typical day as lawyers. And that's kind of shocking to those who think that that's the only place we visit during a day, or that's the only kind of argument we make or kind of conversation we have as lawyers. So I would encourage you to begin with your students, regardless of what age they are, with an introduction of you. I think the real value of this lesson is that students are meeting a real life lawyer or judge in their classroom, live and in front of them, who's not their parent. We all know, if we are parents or if we have youngsters around us, that they don't hear messages the same way from those who are in their life regularly. You can talk to them and talk to them and talk to them sometimes, and you might as well ask that wall to pick itself up and move for all the ways that you think you're actually cracking into their thought process. But a message from an adult who's not their parent or not their family member can sometimes really make a significant difference. They can hear a message in a brand new way simply because the speaker is new. So introduce yourselves however you feel comfortable about that, however you feel willing to make yourself and your professional path open to these students. I think that that's a great way of beginning this lesson, because it allows the students both to know you as a person as well to start to ask questions. And that's really the goal of this lesson, is to have the students involved. This should not be, much as this CLE is, someone at a podium or a table or in front of the classroom talking at the class. Instead, the goal is for your experience in the classroom to be highly interactive, that the students are participating with you, that they're asking questions, that they're actually engaging you. And sometimes that's going to look like a tangent for you, but it's going to be really engaging for the students, and it should be productive for them as well. Even what feels like a tangent can have value, because there's probably more than one person asking the same question. If several people are asking it over and over again, my guess is that it's something that the larger classroom is interested in or confused about or curious about. Does that make sense? Do you have questions about how to get into or register for your classrooms? Is there anyone who is concerned about how to access that information? Please. On the BAR's website, there's a specific site just for the Civic Education Committee, and your teachers can actually go there and register for you to come. There's a form there for the teachers as well as a form for you to fill out with your contact information. And if you don't have an email, if you want to check in with Christy at the end of the CLE, we collected email addresses and will ensure that you get emailed both the link for the website as well as the lesson plans that you're required to prepare with before you arrive. Yes?
Will we have a team teacher in the classroom with us who's another lawyer?
You can go in pairs. The lesson plan is designed such that there can be one facilitator or multiple facilitators depending on how you choose. I will tell you from teaching experience that it is much easier for me to teach as an individual because I'm not tripping on someone else's comments or wondering about the interplay here. I'm wondering more about the interplay with my audience. But I can also say that there's a huge benefit for me when I do arrive to a teaching experience with a colleague, because we orient ourselves to something different. So I can say that there's value in doing it either way. However you feel most comfortable is fine. If you choose to register with a colleague, you should let the teacher know to expect more than one person, and you should also plan your lesson plan accordingly. The lesson plans, in case you haven't looked at them in detail, they are designed to expand by length and by choice. So you have a sort of a menu of options of what you can choose to bring to your students, anywhere from a 45-minute lesson to an hour-and-a-half lesson, depending on how much time you're being given, as well as how much time you choose to take. So for example, in a senior high school classroom, they typically are running about an hour and 10 minutes around the state. And that's pretty fair in terms of you getting about an hour to speak. You should plan on the teacher, for example, taking attendance and attending to sort of the business of the classroom before you get the stage. But that's certainly about an hour for you to plan on filling with your comments or allowing for student questions. So if you only have an hour and you have 2 or 3 colleagues with you, you need to plan that accordingly, how you'll break that down. And the time will go much more quickly if you take colleagues than not.
Well, I got, my recollection of the email was that I'd be getting something by email.
Yeah.
That you'd be getting the lesson or the link?
Yes, by email. Is that, I haven't
And we
seen
have
anything.
both. We have the lesson plans online so that if anyone wanted to go and prepare ahead of time or look ahead of time, you're welcome to do that. There's a separate lesson plan for elementary students and for senior and junior high school students. But you're welcome to pull parts of either lesson plan how you feel comfortable. For example, I have a good friend who's an elementary school teacher who used part of the high school lesson plan. So there's no reason you can't mix or match. And yes, you can expect an email from the committee. We will ensure, in fact, I'll make a note now, that I speak to Christy following this meeting and ensure that an email is sent. We'll double check on the link for the website as well as actual attachments of the lesson plans so that you have everything there in that email and wouldn't have to go hunting for it.
And would we expect to have an email exchange with the teacher?
Yes, you will get the contact information for your teacher unless you registered for a specific classroom, in which case the expectation is that you know or could make contact with that teacher. Several attorneys, for example, volunteered to teach in a neighbor's classroom or their son or daughter's classroom. So they're specifically intending to go to a certain class. If you did not do that, you'll be matched and be given the contact information so that you could email and ask things like parking or timing or anything like that. Yes.
Going to his,
Please.
elaborating on that. I did contact the teacher
Mhm.
that I signed up for, but the email that you sent out said that both the teacher and I would be receiving an additional email, so that's what I told him. Is that true?
The teachers have received emails from the State Office of Education so that they knew what to register for, and they received sample information about what the lesson plan would be made up of so that they knew what to expect, what they were welcoming into their classroom. But now that they've registered, then they can expect to receive an actual copy of your lesson plan so that they can follow up accordingly. They can prepare their students properly. They can also use it for follow-up, and you can use it in any way you see fit.
When you say our lesson plan, do you mean the one that's online? that
Yes,
we-
yes, and it's available to you, like I said, to break apart into whatever component pieces you feel most comfortable with. So, for example, contains a lesson on vocabulary, the common vocabulary of the parts of the courtroom, the roles of the courtroom, and how to orient students properly to the distinction between a civil case and plaintiffs and defendants in a criminal case and the prosecution and the defense. A distinction that some students won't have ever heard of before because their sum total of experience is, 42 minutes of Law and Order plus commercials and everything gets resolved. And they don't know how to distinguish a civil case from a criminal case or the vocabulary that's really contained therein. And the idea might be that the teachers may make their students familiar with some of the vocabulary before you even come, so that they're at a different level of conversation to be with you and talk with you and ask good questions, as opposed to a class where you are the introduction of these concepts and then the teacher may follow up later on. And there's also follow-up information contained in the lesson plan such that the teacher could give a quiz or a writing assignment after you leave based on the discussion you have or the activity you have with the students. Does that make sense as well? Does that yield any other questions? There was another hand I thought, but I don't want to ignore it. Please. The link is on the BAR website. I believe it's under the Civic Education Committee, if I'm not mistaken, right, Ben? That it's under committees and sections in the Civic Education Committee. But I will ensure that the link that you get in the email is active so that you don't have to go hunting for it on the website. You can just use your email link. And I've made a note here, and I'll speak to Christy before I leave to ensure that everyone registered for this CLE receives both an email and that their teachers receive an email as well.
So we
Please.
should expect before our assigned day to talk to the teacher and talk about the lesson plan, what's gonna happen and all that.
You need not go through the lesson plan necessarily with them in great detail, but I think it's useful to just make a connection, let them know you're planning on coming on the 17th. It may be as simple as a quick email exchange, just that you're planning on coming, you're planning on checking in at the office before you get there. Are there any special instructions that you need to have? For example, I was told recently when I went to a local high school to pilot some of these lessons not to come in the break between classes, that there's 1,000 students in the hallway and I might not want to try to walk through the hallway, so I should try to arrive before such and such a time. And the teacher just gave me a heads up about that and to know what to expect. Or that, for example, if I don't check in at the office, they ticket in the faculty parking lot. So that was a good heads up so that I didn't get a ticket or a sticker or something on my window. So it was useful just to have sent the quick email and get that heads up information before I arrived. But not any extensive communication is necessary, no. Any other questions or concerns logistically? Okay. I want to highlight some specific features of the lesson plans for you, just to ensure that we're on the same page about our preparation. And what I would suggest to you really is to ensure that you read all of the materials. In the lesson plan, you'll receive not only your preparatory materials, but you will also receive a copy of student materials. Inside each of the lesson plans, there are worksheets that can be copied, and the bar will copy them for you and leave classroom sets here if you'd like, or you're welcome to provide that yourselves. But there are student worksheets that they can follow along with you, particularly geared for junior high school and senior high school students. The elementary lesson is much more skeletal, so you can decide if you want to give worksheets or not. Some of the elementary school students would be accustomed to this, and some of them wouldn't be really equipped to follow along very well. So you can judge that based on the age group you're speaking to. But it will allow you to see what the students would have in front of them, and it will allow you to have a teacher version of the materials. So for example, it might give you hints about how to start a conversation, or how to respond to a specific question, or how to segue back from a tangent if you're concerned about that. There are hints for you all the way along the lesson plan, so that you're not having to design this or generate the information. But on the other hand, if you are comfortable with that and you want to generate something different to supplement what's there, by all means feel free to do that. Your creativity here should be free-flowing, and we welcome it actually in our classrooms. I think that should enhance the student experience, whatever you choose to contribute beyond the paper of what you receive. The package of materials also includes suggestions about playing games in the classroom. And I would suggest to you that student movement and reorganization in the classroom should be part and parcel of what you bring. So for example, when I've piloted the lesson both in elementary and in high school, I oriented the classroom and had everybody reorganize their desks to look like a courtroom. So I had some people sitting on one side of the courtroom, some people sitting on another side of the courtroom, complete with counsel tables and a gallery of seats and a jury box of seats, just such that the students get a more interactive experience of sitting in the roles that we're talking about, and then trading them around, moving around, and fully expecting that they actually have to pick themselves up and walk to a new location. And for some students, particularly junior high school students, this will be shocking. They are used to going to class and being somewhat stationary, but I find that the physical movement is actually intentional and with a good objective, in that if you have to move your physical position, you sometimes also have to shake up your mind. You will appreciate this as lawyers. We often ask people to move their position, and we sometimes make them move it physically in order to just kind of jar their thinking. And I think that for the students who are used to going to class and simply being the recipient of information, this is a good opportunity for them to be part of the information and part of the dialogue and part of the activity. So the students, on the first time you ask them to pick up and move, might just look at you, but I promise that they actually will get up and move if you ask them, and the teachers are often really cooperative about this. In fact, when I arrived, the teacher had all the desks in the room on one side, and the students just were standing there waiting for me in the one classroom, kind of looking at me like, okay, we're not sitting down, so what are we going to do? And then everyone just kind of got the desks and reorganized the courtroom. But it was a good group activity in terms of sitting people in a particular place, talking through the roles of the courtroom by design, as opposed to only drawing it on a chalkboard or a whiteboard or seeing it on paper, that it made the experience different for the students when they had to, for example, become the prosecuting attorneys and become the defense attorneys based on where they were seated in the classroom. So the lesson is designed both for physical activity as well as for interactivity. So we begin with a vocabulary game, asking the students to match up definitions with the terms, giving them envelopes of vocabulary words and an envelope of the definitions, and not telling them how things fit together, but just asking them, based on their own understanding and their own assumptions, what the words are and what that means. Some of the words are very common to the students. Things like checks and balances in a civics classroom is a common term. So the students are very equipped to define that. Prosecuting attorneys, most students can wrap their arms around this and can find the definition pretty readily. But then when you get into other terms like the appellate court system, or a district court versus a Supreme Court, and comparing those things, some of the students are ill-equipped to define those terms and to understand the distinctions that we might draw as lawyers. But I think that basic conversation, getting everyone on a level playing field, is a really good beginning, because then the students are much better equipped to participate in the activity. And in both the elementary school lessons and the junior and senior high school lesson plans, the interactive activity is a mock trial. It's a condensed version of a mock trial, not requiring a great deal of preparation. In the elementary school activity, it is a trial related to cruelty against Cinderella, and you can see that the charges are outlined, and everyone has a sort of thumbnail read of the facts because everyone knows that story, or at least the assumption is that you're somewhat familiar with the story. And in the junior and senior high school, it's a brand new problem, it's a brand new set of facts that you actually get the opportunity to walk through and even assign some of the students based on the color of their classroom handout, their roles. So the teacher may have distributed the worksheets ahead of time, or you may distribute the worksheets ahead of time, and there are designed to be colored pages of the worksheet such that the person with the red worksheet, for example, becomes the defendant. And so then they, by accident or by design, however you choose or the teacher chooses, take on the role of the person in the scenario, and you help coach them through how to make those arguments. The goal of that argumentation process is really not the argument itself. It's really about you helping craft that, you helping those critical thinking skills along, and those students really understanding that courtroom and legal argument is about the validity of all the sides of the argument, not just simply smashing one person and making fun of one person, or simply discrediting one person and not having any credibility yourself, or coming up with a hollow argument that's basically born of who someone is as opposed to what you're talking about. And the more sophisticated your audience, the more they're better equipped to understand that message and participate with you. I will say this, I am so impressed with our students and how they participate with these arguments, that they actually are quite intrigued by the possibility of taking on these roles and investing themselves, not in any kind of superficial way, but really taking it on and wanting to participate well in the argument process. And that in fact, I was hard pressed to want to leave at the end of the day because we kept wanting to go further. I kept thinking to myself, well, I'll just come back tomorrow, realizing that that's totally impractical because then I'd hang out in the junior high school for a while, and that's probably not the best choice. But it was really interesting, and it was really impressive to me to see young people so excited about the chance to actually do something in their classroom as opposed to only hear about it or read about it, that they really invested themselves in the chance to live it out and try it out. Ben, you have a hand.
Michelle, I'm sorry to interrupt, but to backtrack.
Please.
So we're all clear. By tomorrow, on our website, there'll be a link to the curriculum and everything else related to this project. If you want to get to it today, you can go to the utahbar.org/highschoolcivics.html and you get it today. But by tomorrow, there'll be a link. You go to our website and get it. So just to clarify, I apologize that
That's
you
okay.
have that information.
So the link itself isn't live, but the site is available to
The
people.
site's live right now, but the
Mhm.
link is not.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want me to repeat that? utahbar.org/highschoolcivics with an s.html. And that will include both the lesson plans, excuse me, as well as the registration forms, so that you can direct colleagues or teachers to that site.
It doesn't work right now.
That's
High
the
school,
most current information I have.
Okay.
high school civics, and I didn't spell it like they did on the road a few weeks ago, SHCOOL. Spelled it right.
We'll double check the link, and we'll also ensure that it's sent in an email to you just to make sure you have that information. Have any of you looked at the lesson materials when you were first registering? Did you see that link? So you saw some of the interactivity and you saw some of the games and the lesson plans. Good. The senior and junior high school lesson plan specifically is geared toward a fact scenario where a trial has occurred, there has been a result in a Utah courtroom, and you're taking to these students the opportunity to appeal that decision. A concept that teenagers know well. They're constantly appealing decision-making to their other respective parent. When they're talking to one, they're constantly working the other in another room, or grandparents on the telephone in my house to try and get a better decision, right? So this is a concept that they know intellectually, but they may not have experience with, the idea that in an appellate courtroom, for example, you don't have a whole new trial. So the goal of that appellate process is both to bring awareness to them of the full spectrum of the legal system in its entirety, why we have the appellate system and what it is designed to accomplish, as well that you don't have to worry about, for example, preparing witnesses or anything like that with the older students, but you can really dig deeper into the materials and have them ask some really subtle questions. There's even some tips for the students who are chosen to serve on the panel of judges about how to ask questions of counsel when they're appearing before you, and what kinds of things you might ask of counsel in order to generate a slightly different conversation than they might have prepared to bring you. So it is a slightly different orientation to a mock trial, quote unquote, concept, because it's unfamiliar to students. Oral argument will be unfamiliar to them. But the idea of standing in the shoes of a person who's been wronged or who's had a decision that has come down to them by an authority figure that they don't like, this is a concept teenagers are very familiar with and they really have resonance with. And they actually like getting to try out trying to fix the problem that as they see it, or trying to champion the cause of the little person against the authority to try to fix what has been wrong. And I think that what you'll find is that despite the fact that they're unfamiliar with the process, they're very familiar with the content of how to make the argument, of how to get there, even not knowing themselves that they're making a very complex or a sophisticated or even a subtle legal argument, but that they just by instinct want to champion something. They know that they can pound their fist on the table about something, and they know instinctually that they want to say something about it. They just don't like being the little guy wronged by the government, for example. In this instance, we're tracing a fact pattern all the way through all the branches of government in order to highlight why we have an independent judiciary. So the legislature has passed a piece of legislation that affects all the communities of Utah. A community member obviously affected by the legislation has been both accused of having violated the criminal statute and then found guilty of it in a trial courtroom, and now they're appealing that conviction such that they can try to remedy their own situation. And then you see what the verdict comes to in your classroom. I've tried this out in 3 or 4 classrooms, and the verdicts have all been different. The decision making has all been different. So you can assure the students also that within the law there's sort of this lovely concept that there may not be one right answer. There may be multiple right answers on any given day, and you have to do your best to choose between them. And that for some of us that's the luxury of our role, and for some of us it's the bane of our existence, that there's not just one right answer. And that it is sort of a beautiful piece of American law that we regenerate ourselves every so often. So even if we mess it up on any given day, we just might get a second bite at the apple to fix it down the road. And the students, I think, are particularly intrigued by this concept too, because they very often are hemmed in by authority at their age. They're told that there is one path and you have to live on this one path, and there are boundaries to that. And that this gives them a little bit of creative license to stray from that and to explore the law in a way that feels more free, that they can test and their own ideas and maybe even challenge you back, which if you're like me, you feel a little bit lit on fire in front of the classroom to see the students do that, because it's quite fun to see them press each other and press you for a better answer. Why is it this way? Or how come it works like that? Or I don't think it should be that way. That was my favorite comment. I don't think it should work like that. And I think to myself, I think that quite often. I'm glad to know someone else thinks that too. I don't know what you do with that information when you think it doesn't work in a particular way in our system. But I like that we think that way. I like that as Americans we orient ourselves to, I don't think it should be quite like that, and somehow I have to find a way to fix that. There's a good orientation in young people that they came with that energy and that kind of spirit to the lesson plan. I want to respect our time, and we've got about 15 minutes left to go. And since most of you haven't had an opportunity to see the lesson plan, I'm going to talk with you a little bit then about the learning objectives, the goals for what we would like to have the students leave our classrooms with. One of the things that we wanted to notice in the Common Core of Utah is that it's highlighting very specific sets of skills for our students. One of them was small group work, that we are trying to orient students from the age of K through 12th grade to working with one another in a collaborative way. So part of the goal of this lesson plan is for you to help the students break away from just working with their friends, or just sitting in their individual desk, or only sitting at their table in an elementary school classroom and not interacting with the other side of the room, but really trying to get them oriented to the notion that as adults, we don't often get to choose who we work with, whether we like them or not. And sometimes those folks that we don't like very often actually are people we have to work with regularly, as shocking as that concept may be. And that we have to get along with that. That we as lawyers in particular understand this notion that we get along with people with whom we disagree. That despite the fact that we might feel very strongly that someone else's opinion is wrong, we still have to find a way to work with that other person. And that's one of the common core values of the curriculum, both in elementary and in junior and in senior high school students, that's changed for social studies now to be common throughout the state of Utah in all of our classrooms, to really orient students to group work. So the goal for you is to bring that value to the forefront of your teaching. So whenever you feel like it's a useful component of your teaching to break students into smaller groups as opposed to teaching to the entire classroom, for example, that vocabulary game, that's a great opportunity for small group work. As opposed to presenting the entire list of terms to the whole classroom and the entire list of definitions and asking for volunteers to make the matches, get the students in smaller groups, much the way you're organized today, and pass out the terms and definitions to all of the different groups and let them work together in a smaller cluster. The learning is slightly different and the teamwork is slightly different, but the students get an enhanced benefit, I think, from that smaller group structure. Another common value and learning objective for us as bar members to take to the students is the value of dialogue, but dialogue in a particular way, right? We appreciate that in the courtroom there are rules that structure how we speak to one another, or if we speak actually to one another or only to an authority. And in the classroom, sometimes it's competing, right? The dialogue is competing. The student who constantly raises their hand is the student who may or may not get called on and may or may not be the voice that you hear from all the time, and there may be just a lone voice somewhere in the classroom that doesn't often get heard or doesn't often participate. So the goal is to structure your dialogue such that everyone has the opportunity and the ability to participate in your discussion. So it may mean you moving throughout the room. It may mean you walking around in the desks or walking through all of the tables in order to spark some conversation with different parts of the room. Or it may mean you breaking the classroom up. My experience was that it worked well to simply assign sections of the room to represent particular opinions. So if I broke the classroom in quadrants, then this quadrant of the room represented the judicial opinion, this quadrant of the room represented a legislative action, and the two back halves of the classroom represented the two different sides of the argument. And they had to orient themselves to the problem that way from then on. They could only speak from their respective point of view. And that I would visit the different parts of the classroom in order to generate discussion in a different way. And the goal was really that dialogue doesn't sound like debate, despite the fact that on television for the last few months, or even a year, dare I say, that they've seen politics look like chewing your face and talking about another person in a really negative way and debating and talking over each other, that's not dialogue. That's not what we know as lawyers of getting the job done. If we negotiated with people that way all day long, our clients would be very dissatisfied, and we would have a really dissatisfying profession. That instead, dialogue really does look like listening. Very often, it's not an active thing. It is something where you may very well be quiet, but you're actively participating by listening, hearing a message, and then participating. And so for the students, it's both modeling those values as well as bringing them to the classroom. Really championing the notion of what good dialogue is and how they can participate in it. And then finally, the last value of the social studies Common Core is one of creative and critical thinking. So beyond the skills of just receiving the vocabulary, right? Knowing the roles in the courtroom, knowing all the different players from the judge to the court reporter to a bailiff to a witness and a jury member, beyond knowing those definitions, that you can actually think through those terms and how they interact differently. So for example, asking questions like, how would it feel to be the defendant in a case? Not just what is the defendant and can I spit back that information, right? We all know that in school we often did that. We knew the information as long as we were going to take a test or a quiz, and we could get to class, we could fill in the respective bubbles, and then when we left class and anyone asked us anything, we had forgotten because we knew the dates and the times and the information and the names long enough to pass the test, but really to have a conversation about it, we might not have learned that way. And the goal for this kind of lesson planning is really for the students to dig in a little deeper and to think a little bit beyond the page. So more than just knowing that there are roles in the courtroom, what is it like to be that? Could you be a defendant? What might drive you to be a defendant, for example, was part of the conversation that came up in the high school classroom where I was teaching this lesson. What would cause you to be a defendant, aside from sort of a reckless choice with your friends? You know, what is something that would make you want to have to break a law or make you choose something that you ordinarily wouldn't choose, but you find yourself in a circumstance that then you have to respond and be accountable for your behavior? And we spoke candidly about it. When were the times that we might choose to do something wrong, and what would that look like? And how do you take accountability for that? What does it feel like to have to be the person in the room who takes accountability? That we don't often show that, for example, to young people, that adults have to take accountability for wrongdoing. And that the young people really respond to that, this notion that everyone has to answer for a wrong that they've done or be accountable for it in a particular way or a particular consequence. So asking those critical thinking questions, and it's okay for those questions to be totally outside the box. It does not have to be where you're teaching a lesson about the parts and roles of the courtroom or the aspects of oral argument in a criminal case that's now been to trial and had a verdict and now is being appealed to our appellate system, but really trying to understand what people are doing, why you would appeal something, why you would continue to ask questions even after you've gotten the first round of answers, for example, and why that matters in our system. Why is an independent judiciary what we champion as lawyers and judges? Why do we look to that as such a hallmark of who we are as Americans, as opposed to voting for our judges, for example, at the election in November? Why would we never think of doing this? Why would we think that that's such an odd concept? And asking the students to really think through those questions as opposed to only understand the surface level of information. So the goals are sort of three parts there. The importance of dialogue, the importance of the students' group work, and then the importance of their critical thinking skills. And the lesson then also offers to the teachers, and you can highlight this for them, there are websites for them to visit, including the American Bar Association Civic Education website and the Utah State Law-Related Education Project website that give the teachers greater opportunity to talk about the judiciary in their classrooms. You may be surprised to learn, for example, that several high school classroom textbooks only talk about the judiciary as if we're a Supreme Court, that we have 9 justices who sit on a Supreme Court and that that's constitutionally designed and that that's the sum total of the judiciary. And we know that our system is much more rich than this. We know that the people we work for and the problems that we try to deal with actually don't really get there, that there's something else we're doing as lawyers and there's some other way we're orienting ourselves to the legal system, and that it has value for the students to see and hear about it from us, that we as lawyers have a unique expertise to offer to them and a unique perspective about what they're doing in a classroom that can really awaken their lessons as opposed to merely be a guest speaker that comes on a temporary basis for a half an hour or so and then makes their exit and didn't really have an impact. Aside from which, you can also mentor folks to go to law school, which I happen to think is a really good thing to do. I make as many plugs for going to law school as I can on any given day because I just think it's a useful thing to do, even if you're not going to lawyer in any kind of traditional sense. It's a really lovely place to get an education about what it means to be a good citizen and an American and to participate in our system. So I think that it's a good graduate school experience for those who are inclined. So I think for the high school students who are looking for some direction, it can also be a mentoring experience for them to see and hear about your professional path, because many of us got to our professions in odd ways, in ways that we didn't expect to be doing this down the road. And the young people can benefit from having heard that there's no one way to be a lawyer, there's not one way to have arrived at the title of or role of lawyer, and that there are many ways for them to pick their professions and be successful, whether it's lawyering or not. Does that yield any other questions or comments about the lesson or the objectives or the goals for going to our classrooms? Please.
You seem to be focusing principally on the judiciary, but it was my understanding that this was supposed to deal with the Constitution.
It deals with the Constitution in the sense that we discussed that there are 3 branches of government with interactive roles that have checks and balances on one another, but the heart of the lesson is to talk about the value of an independent judiciary and the rule of law. That the goal is for students to walk away with an enhanced understanding of the judiciary by the mere fact that most of their textbooks and their learning won't expose them to why those things are so. They talk through the legislature, even in terms of nuts and bolts, how many members of the House, how many senators, how the Senate and the House works together, what the Senate and House processes look like. The legislative process is actually quite explicated for students in their textbook materials. On the other hand, the judiciary is hardly discussed. It's a very limited discussion of what the judiciary actually accomplishes, let alone the values of an independent judiciary. And so while we mention the other branches and talk about the Constitution in terms of its framework for our government, we didn't feel that it was useful for lawyers to walk in and start to assume the role of legislator and talk about what the legislature should do or what the executive branch should do, while we all have our respective opinions about what that may be and could offer them rather freely. The goal of this is to offer them in part of our expertise, that we come to the classroom really geared toward understanding the judiciary as a unique aspect of our government, and we're highlighting that specifically based on how it interacts with the other branches. So that's why, for example, in the high school lesson plan, it begins with a legislative question, talks about the legislative process briefly, then explains how the executive branch would interact with the piece of legislation to affirm it or to roll it out and carry it out in our communities, and then how the judiciary would interact if there were a problem with the legislation. So there's some interactivity there, but it's not designed to highlight the other branches in large measure. Any other questions or concerns? I want to give you an opportunity to check back in at the desk to make sure that we do have, if you're concerned that you didn't register with your email address or you came in at the door, that we do have your contact information as well, that you can pick up your constitutions when you leave. Ben?
Michelle, one other thing, I'm informed that you should have received an email. If you haven't received your email, since it comes under the listserv, you may want to check your junk mail to see if it didn't come. So if you signed up and been assigned a teacher, you should have received automatically an email with this information. So double check, and if it's a problem, let us know. We'll forward it.
I'm seeing a lot of shaking heads rather than nods.
We got an email saying you'll get another email, right?
And that other.
With this information.
So I think it's the link and the lesson plans that you're needing now, right? That's the next step of what you're
We
needing.
haven't seen
Email
it.
to the email you didn't receive.
You're seeing one almost immediately.
Yes.
We'll make sure that those emails are sent so that you can expect to see those lesson plans. And there's also an email address attached to this high school civics website, so that if you have questions about it as you're reading through, you can email back to the website and the committee will respond to you, so that if you have a mechanism to discuss with the committee. There was another hand, please.
Do you have a contact name and phone number if we're having a problem, we can call?
About the lesson plan?
No, about anything, if we're not getting an email or something.
Christy Abad is the contact here at the State Bar who is organizing both the website as well as those emails and the registration process. Christy Abad. If you have a problem with your lesson plan or you want to talk through your lesson plan, I don't mind hearing from any of you about it or your experience. I'm happy to hear from you, get an email from you. I'm happy to talk with you about it. I'm also happy to direct you, if you do like this experience of being involved in our classrooms in a particular way, you are welcome to become involved with the Utah Law Related Education Project. We're constantly looking for volunteers, both in our mock trial programs, our We the People Civics program for students. We look for judges and coaches to participate with young people in our statewide competitions. So if this is something that interests you, you're more than welcome to be in touch with the Law Related Education Project to participate as a volunteer in those programs. And like we said at the beginning of this discussion, we do hope this becomes a more sustained effort rather than just a one-time, one-year rollout of volunteers in our classrooms, that this can become an annual event for lawyers and judges to be in classrooms. So if you would like to continue to be involved, we welcome hearing from you about how to do that. So thank you. Don't hesitate to pick up your constitutions on the way out or to be in touch with us further. Good luck. Have fun.